Hospitals have been caught in the crossfire during the Israel-Hamas war, both literally and in the clashing narratives of the conflict. Today is Sunday, November 12th, 2023, and this is the Dunkley Report. Hospitals have been caught in the crossfire during the Israel-Hamas war, both literally and in the clashing narratives of the conflict. Israel says Hamas militants are using hospitals as shields for fighters, while the Palestinians and rights groups accuse Israel of recklessly harming civilians there. On Saturday, close-quarters combat between the Israeli military and Hamas militants raged around Gaza's largest and most advanced hospital, Shifa. The intense battles around Shifa and other hospitals in the rubble-filled streets of Gaza City raised an urgent question. When do medical facilities lose special protection under international humanitarian law? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is pushing back against growing international calls for a ceasefire, saying Israel's battle to crush Gaza's ruling Hamas militants would continue with full force. Netanyahu said in a televised address Saturday that a ceasefire would only be possible if militants in Gaza release all of the 239 hostages taken in the deadly Hamas attack on southern Israel on October 7. The Israeli leader also insisted that after the war, Gaza would be demilitarized and Israel would retain security control there. Israeli troops and Hamas gunmen battled Saturday outside Gaza's largest hospital, where frantic doctors said the last generator had run out of fuel. Supporters of the Palestinians have marched peacefully through central London as right-wing counter-protesters clashed with police after a week of angry debate over whether to permit the demonstration on a day when Britain honored its war dead. Tensions have been fueled by Home Secretary Suella Braverman's comments earlier this week, in which she characterized pro-Palestinian demonstrations as hate marches and called for Saturday's event to be blocked out of respect for Armistice Day. The skirmishes between police and counter-protesters appear to confirm the concerns that Braverman's comments would attract right-wing elements looking for an excuse to confront the pro-Palestinian marchers. The march was apparently the largest in London since the start of the conflict. Republicans are increasingly focused on President Joe Biden's brother Jim, as they dig for evidence that could be used for impeachment proceedings. They haven't turned up any proof of wrongdoing by the president, but they recently subpoenaed Jim Biden and others as part of their investigations. Some of Jim Biden's business ventures have ended with debts and acrimony, and his business dealings have shadowed his brother's political career for decades. Most recently, Jim Biden's work with a failed health care startup, Khaled AmeriCorps, has faced fresh scrutiny from Republicans. Jim Biden's lawyer says Jim Biden has never involved his brother in his business dealings. Pope Francis has removed from office the Bishop of Tyler, Texas. Bishop Joseph Strickland is a conservative who is active on social media and has been a fierce critic of the pontiff and some of his priorities. A one-line statement from the Vatican says Francis has relieved Strickland of the pastoral governance of Tyler and appointed the Bishop of Austin as the temporary administrator. Strickland has emerged as a critic of Francis, in particular of his recent meeting on the future of the Catholic Church. Earlier this year, the Vatican sent in investigators to look into Strickland's governance of the diocese, amid reports he was making doctrinally unorthodox claims. Donald Trump is pushing for his federal election interference trial in Washington to be televised. He's joining media outlets that say the American public should be able to watch the historic case unfold. Federal court rules prohibit broadcasting proceedings, but the Associated Press and other news organizations say the unprecedented case of a former president's standing trial on accusations that he tried to subvert the will of voters warrants making an exception. The Justice Department argues that the judge overseeing the case doesn't have the authority to ignore the long-standing nationwide policy against cameras in federal courtrooms. Trump said during a campaign rally Saturday, "I want this trial to be seen by everybody in the world." As a U.S. Navy surveillance plane flew in circles, dozens of Chinese Coast Guard and accompanying ships chased and encircled Philippine vessels in the latest confrontation in the South China Sea. At the height of Friday's face-off, a Chinese Coast Guard ship blasted a water cannon toward a Philippine motorboat, delivering food and other supplies to Filipino forces on a marooned, rusting warship that serves as the country's fragile territorial outpost at Second Thomas Shoal. China has steadfastly stood by its claim to virtually the entire South China Sea, clashing with its smaller neighbors and drawing in the United States, Manila's treaty ally. Washington has deployed Navy ships to promote freedom of navigation and overflight, and promised to stand by the Philippines if attacked. A new large study finds that the popular weight loss drug Wegovy reduced the risk of serious heart problems by 20% in certain patients. The international trial showed the weekly injections prevented heart attacks, strokes, and heart-related deaths. Wegovy is a high-dose version of the diabetes treatment Ozempic. The latest study tested Wegovy in people without the disease. It's being praised as a landmark study that could change the way doctors treat heart disease in some patients. The findings could also shift perceptions that a new class of obesity drugs are cosmetic treatments and put pressure on insurers to cover them. President Joe Biden and Chinese leader Xi Jinping are preparing to meet at the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Summit this coming week in San Francisco. So far, basic information about Wednesday's planned get-together has remained guarded. That could ratchet up the pressure on how each side negotiates, down to the smallest detail. Any encounter involving the U.S. president and a foreign leader requires tricky logistics. But few cultures are more attuned to etiquette than the Chinese. On top of that, the often conflicting interests between Washington and Beijing may make things all the more delicate. Haggling may include everything from who enters the room first, what kind of flowers are present, and whether a meal is served. In the face of human-caused climate change, impacting water access and weather patterns in the Willamette Valley, a region known for hops growing, farmers are using all the new strategies they can get to stay afloat and provide for large and small breweries alike. Climate change is anticipated to only further the challenges producers are already seeing in hops and barley, researchers are working with growers to help counter the effects of more volatile weather systems with improved hop varieties, and by adding winter barley to the mix. Today's news was reported by the Associated Press. This has been the World News for Sunday, November 12th, 2023. Thanks again for joining us at The Dunkley Report.